The leather strap tore clean through in Yates Xavier's calloused hands as he tried to cinch his saddle one last time, and something inside him broke along with it. He stood there in the dusty street of Lordsburg, New Mexico Territory, in the scorching afternoon of June 1878, staring at the ruined tack like it represented every failure in his 26 years of living. The gelding beneath him shifted, impatient, and Yates dismounted with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the long cattle drive he had just finished. 3 months on the trail from Texas, and he had arrived in this settlement with money in his pocket, but nothing resembling peace in his chest. The war had ended 13 years ago, but Yates still woke most nights with the taste of gunpowder on his tongue and the screams of dying men in his ears. He had been barely more than a boy when he lied about his age to fight, and the things he had seen ensured he would never be a boy again. His older brother had died at Gettysburg. His father drank himself into the grave 2 years after that. His mother followed within the year, and Yates had been drifting ever since, working cattle drives and ranch jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or let anyone get close enough to see the hollow space where his heart used to be. A man in a dusty bowler had walked past and jerked his chin toward the broken saddle. "Saddler down the way," he said, pointing toward a small adobe building with a wooden sign that read Lorenzo's Leather Goods in faded paint. "Though old Lorenzo died last winter, his daughter runs it now." Yates nodded his thanks and led his horse down the rutted street, past the saloon already filling with evening drinkers, past the general store and the assay office, and the dozens of rough men who had come to this corner of the territory seeking silver or cattle or anonymity. He had no interest in the first two, and the third had served him poorly. A man could run from everything except what lived inside his own skull. The leather shop sat at the end of the street, its door propped open to catch whatever breeze might stir in the stifling heat. Yates tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped inside, blinking as his eyes adjusted from the brutal sunlight to the dim interior. The smell hit him first, the rich scent of leather and oil and something herbal he could not name. Then he saw her. She sat on a low stool beside a workbench near the window, bent over a saddle that had seen better days, her hands moving with quick, sure movements as she stitched a torn section of the seat back together. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that fell past her shoulders, and she wore a simple cotton dress the color of adobe clay, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. She did not look up at his entrance, completely absorbed in her work, and for a moment Yates just stood there, watching the way her fingers moved, watching the intense concentration on her face. Something shifted in his chest, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. She must have sensed him standing there because she glanced up, and Yates found himself looking into the darkest eyes he had ever seen, nearly black in the dim light. Her face was sun-browned and pretty in an unpretentious way, with strong features that spoke of determination and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though she was not smiling now. "Can I help you?" Her voice was lower than he expected, slightly husky, and there was a wariness in it that he recognized because he heard it in his own voice whenever he spoke to strangers. "Saddle strap broke," he said, holding up the ruined piece of leather. "Man outside said this was the place to get it fixed." She set down the saddle she had been working on and stood, wiping her hands on a rag tucked into her belt. She was shorter than he had expected, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, but there was nothing diminutive about her presence. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and when she took the broken strap from his hands, her fingers brushed his for just a second. Even that brief contact sent a jolt through him that he had not felt in longer than he could remember. I can fix this, she said, examining the break with a critical eye. But it will need to be replaced entirely. This leather is too worn to hold a proper repair. I can have it done by tomorrow afternoon if you are staying in town. I am, Yates heard himself say, though he had not made any such decision before walking through her door. How much? $2 for the strap and the labor. She looked up at him, and he noticed the shadows under her eyes, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights. I can do it for $1.50 if you can wait until the day after tomorrow. I have several rush jobs that came in this morning. Tomorrow is fine, Yates said, and $2 is fair. She nodded and turned to hang the strap on a peg behind the counter, making a note in a ledger that lay open beside a scatter of tools and leather scraps. What name should I put this under? Yates Xavier. Bridget Lorenzo. She did not offer her hand, but something in her expression softened slightly. You are new to Lordsburg. It was not a question. Just rode in today, finished a cattle drive from Texas. There is a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it. Clean rooms, decent food. Better than the Floff House above the saloon. Obliged for the information. Yates found himself reluctant to leave, though he could not have said why. There was something about this woman, about the capable way she handled the leather, about the quiet competence in her movements that drew him in a way he did not fully understand. Your father started this shop. A shadow crossed her face. He did. 20 years ago, when Lordsburg was barely more than a stage stop, he taught me the trade from the time I was old enough to hold an awl. I was told he passed. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Yates saw the tightness around her mouth, the way her shoulders had gone rigid. It was last December. Fever took him fast. There was more to that story, Yates could tell. Layers of grief and possibly anger or regret beneath the simple words, but he was not fool enough to pry. He knew about loss. He knew about the things people carried that could not be spoken aloud to strangers. I will come by tomorrow then, he said, settling his hat back on his head. After 2, Bridget said, already turning back to her work. But as he reached the door, she spoke again. Welcome to Lordsburg, Mr. Xavier. I hope you find whatever you are looking for here. He paused, one hand on the door frame, and looked back at her. She had picked up the saddle again and bent her head over it, her needle already moving in those quick, sure stitches. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the window and caught in her dark hair, turning it almost bronze, and Yates felt that strange shift in his chest again, that sense of something locked away beginning to crack open. I was not looking for anything, he said quietly. But maybe I should have been. She glanced up at that, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that look, some recognition that went deeper than names or circumstances. Then she bent her head again, and Yates stepped out into the brutal heat of the New Mexico afternoon, his broken saddle strap left behind, but carrying something new and unfamiliar stirring in the hollow space behind his ribs. He found the boarding house where Bridget had directed him, a squat adobe building with a shaded courtyard, and a Chinese woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Chen. She had come west with her husband during the railroad boom, she told him as she showed him to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. Her husband had died in a construction accident 5 years ago, and she had stayed in Lordsburg, running the boarding house and raising her 2 children alone. You staying long? She asked as she handed him the key. Not sure yet, Yates admitted. Maybe a few days, maybe longer. Mrs. Chen studied him with sharp, knowing eyes, running from something or to something, neither, just drifting. She did not look convinced. Supper is at 6. No drinking in the rooms, no violence. You break my rules, you leave. Yes, madam. That night, Yates lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of Lordsburg settling into darkness. Voices from the saloon, dogs barking, the distant whistle of a train passing through on the Southern Pacific Line. He thought about Bridget Lorenzo in her leather shop, her hands moving with such sureness, such purpose. He wondered what it would be like to have that kind of certainty, to know exactly what you were meant to do and to do it well. He had not felt that kind of purpose since before the war. Since before he had learned that men could do unspeakable things to each other in the name of causes they barely understood. Since before he had done some of those unspeakable things himself, because the alternative was to die. And even at 13, he had wanted desperately to live, even if living meant carrying a weight that grew heavier with each passing year. Sleep, when it finally came, brought the usual dreams. The crack of rifles, the screams of wounded horses, the face of the first man he had killed, a Confederate soldier who could not have been more than 16, looking up at him with startled eyes as Yates's bayonet slid between his ribs. He woke just before dawn, sweat-soaked and shaking, and lay there waiting for the sun to rise and burn away the ghosts. He spent the next day exploring Lordsburg, such as it was. The town had grown up around the railroad and the nearby silver mines, a rough collection of adobe and wood buildings strung along a dusty main street. There were perhaps 300 people living there, he guessed, a mix of Mexican families who had been there for generations, Anglo settlers drawn by the mining boom, a scattering of Chinese workers from the railroad, and the usual assortment of drifters and gamblers and painted women who followed opportunity wherever it led. Yates found work easily enough. The foreman at the stockyards was looking for men who knew cattle, and Yates knew cattle as well as he knew anything. He started the next morning, which meant he had money coming in and a reason to stay in Lordsburg, at least for a while. The work was hard but honest, and there was something almost meditative about it, a way to quiet the noise in his head. But even as he worked, sorting steers and mending fences and doing the 100 small tasks that kept the stockyards running, part of his mind kept drifting back to the leather shop at the end of the street, to the woman with the dark eyes and the capable hands who had looked at him like she could see straight through to the broken places inside. He told himself he was being foolish. He had no business getting interested in anyone, not when he could barely hold himself together on most days. Not when he knew he was not the kind of man who could offer a woman anything resembling a normal life. But foolish or not, when 2 o'clock came the next afternoon, he found himself walking toward Lorenzo's leather goods with an eagerness that felt almost foreign. The door was propped open again, and this time when Yates stepped inside, Bridget looked up immediately. "Mr. Xavier," she said, and was that a hint of pleasure in her voice? "Your strap is ready. Let me get it." She disappeared into a back room and returned a moment later with a new leather strap, beautifully crafted and already fitted with the necessary buckles and rivets. Yates took it from her, running his fingers over the smooth leather, impressed by the quality of her work. "This is fine craftsmanship," he said, "better than the original. My father taught me not to do anything halfway." Bridget accepted the $2 he handed her and made a notation in her ledger. "He said if you are going to fix something, fix it right so it will last." Wise man. He was. She closed the ledger and looked at him, and there was something searching in her gaze as if she were trying to decide something. "Are you really staying in Lordsburg, or were you just being polite?" "I am staying. Got work at the stockyards starting tomorrow." "I see." She paused, and Yates thought he saw a flicker of satisfaction cross her face before she schooled it back to neutrality. "Then I suppose I will see you around." "I suppose you will." He should have left then. He had his repaired strap and there was no reason to linger. But something made him stay, some impulse he had thought long dead. "Miss Lorenzo, would you have dinner with me? There is a restaurant I passed yesterday that looked decent." She blinked, clearly surprised. For a long moment she just looked at him, and Yates braced himself for rejection. Then, slowly, she smiled, and it transformed her entire face, chasing away the wariness and the shadows and leaving something warm and genuine in their place. "Yes," she said, "I would like that. But not the restaurant. The food there is terrible. Come back at 6 and we can eat at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen is a good cook. You know Mrs. Chen. Everyone knows Mrs. Chen. She is one of the few people in this town worth knowing." Bridget's smile turned slightly mischievous. "Besides, if we eat at the restaurant, everyone will gossip. If we eat at the boarding house, only Mrs. Chen will gossip, and she will be kinder about it." Yates found himself smiling back, a real smile that felt strange on his face because it had been so long since he had used those muscles. 6 o'clock then. He returned to the boarding house and cleaned up as best he could, washing away the trail dust and shaving carefully in front of the small mirror in his room. He put on his cleanest shirt and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing or why his hands were actually shaking slightly as he buttoned his cuffs. Bridget arrived promptly at 6, wearing a different dress, this one a soft blue that brought out the warmth in her skin. Her hair was still in a braid, but she had woven a ribbon through it, a small vanity that touched something in Yates's chest. Mrs. Chen served them at a small table in the courtyard, where flowering vines climbed the adobe walls and softened the harsh edges of the desert landscape. The food was simple but delicious: roasted chicken and vegetables, fresh bread, and a sweet rice pudding for dessert. They ate mostly in comfortable silence at first, but gradually conversation began to flow. Bridget told him about growing up in Lordsburg, about learning the leather trade from her father, about the challenges of running a business as a woman in a town where most people assumed she would fail without her father's guidance. "But I am good at what I do," she said with quiet pride. "Better than he was in some ways, though I would never have said so while he lived. My stitching is tighter and I have a better eye for where leather will wear. People know that now. They trust my work." "They should," Yates said. "That strap you made me will probably outlast my horse." She laughed at that, a low, genuine sound that made something warm bloom in his chest. "I hope not. I am fond of that horse. He has a kind eye. He is a good animal, got me through the drive with no complaints. What brought you west?" Bridget asked, and there was no pushiness in the question, just gentle curiosity. Yates considered how much to tell her. Usually he deflected these kinds of questions, gave vague answers that revealed nothing. But something about Bridget made him want to be honest, or as honest as he could be without drowning her in his darkness. "Restlessness," he said finally. "I have been drifting since the war ended, could not seem to settle anywhere. Thought maybe out here, away from everything, I might find some peace." "And have you?" He looked at her across the small table, at her dark eyes watching him with an understanding that went deeper than her years. She was 23, she had told him, old enough to have seen hardship but young enough that it had not completely worn her down. There was strength in her, but also a softness she had not yet learned to hide. "I might be starting to," he said quietly. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, and her hand moved across the table toward his. She did not quite touch him, but her fingers rested close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin. "The war was hard on everyone," she said, "even those of us who did not fight. My father fought for the Union. He never spoke much about it, but sometimes at night I would hear him crying out in his sleep. Whatever he saw changed him, made him harder, but also kinder in strange ways, like he was trying to make up for something." "I know that feeling," Yates admitted. They sat there as the desert evening deepened around them, talking about easier things. The books they had read, the places they had seen, the small observations about life that meant nothing and everything. Yates found himself telling her about his childhood in Missouri, about his older brother who had been his hero, about his mother's garden and the way she could make anything grow even in the poorest soil. Bridget told him about her mother, who had died when she was 10, a fever similar to the one that had taken her father. She told him about learning to cook and keep house while still helping her father in the shop, about the loneliness of being the only child of a man who loved her, but did not know how to show it except through teaching her his trade. "I think that is why I kept the shop going after he died," she said as they finished their coffee. "It is the only way I still have of connecting with him. Every stitch I make, every piece of leather I cut, I am doing it the way he taught me. It is like he is still here, guiding my hands." "That is a good way to remember someone," Yates said. "You have a good way to remember your brother." The question hit harder than she could have known. Yates was quiet for a long moment, staring into his empty coffee cup. "No," he said finally. "I try not to remember him at all. Because when I do, I remember how he died, and that is too hard to carry." Bridget's hand crossed the final distance between them and covered his. Her skin was warm and slightly rough from her work, real and solid, and Yates found himself turning his hand over and lacing his fingers through hers. It was the first time he had held a woman's hand in years, and the simple intimacy of it nearly undid him. "I am glad you came to Lordsburg," Bridget said softly. "I am glad your saddle strap broke." "So am I," Yates said, and meant it with an intensity that frightened him. They saw each other often after that. Lordsburg was small enough that their paths crossed naturally, but they also sought each other out deliberately. Yates would stop by the leather shop in the evenings after work, and they would sit together while Bridget finished whatever project she was working on. She taught him about leather, about the different types and how to work with each one, and he found a peace in watching her hands move, in the rhythmic pull of thread through hide. Sometimes they would walk together through the town as the desert cooled, talking about everything and nothing. Bridget showed him the hidden corners of Lordsburg. The canyon a mile outside of town where water pooled after the rare rains. The old mission church with its beautiful carved doors. The spot on the ridge where you could watch the sun set over the empty land and feel like you were the only person in the world. Yates found himself coming alive in ways he had thought impossible. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and when he woke gasping in the dark, he could calm himself by thinking about Bridget, about the way she smiled when she was concentrating, about the sound of her laugh and the warmth of her hand in his. He was falling in love with her. He knew it, and it terrified him, because love meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. But he could not seem to stop himself. Every moment with her drew him deeper, like a current pulling him under, and he was too tired of fighting to resist. One evening, about a month after they had first met, they sat together in the courtyard of the boarding house after another shared meal. The summer heat had broken slightly, and there was an almost pleasant coolness in the air. Bridget was telling him a story about a customer who had insisted his saddle was haunted because it creaked, and Yates was laughing, actually laughing, when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence and looked at him with an expression he could not read. "What?" he asked. "You are different than when you first came here," she said. "Lighter somehow, like you are not carrying quite so much weight." Yates considered that. It was true. The crushing heaviness that had followed him for years had lessened, not disappeared but become bearable. "That is because of you," he said honestly. "Me. You make me remember there are good things in the world, beautiful things worth protecting." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You make me want to be the man I might have been if the war had never happened." Bridget's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You already are that man, Yates. You just could not see it." He kissed her then, leaning across the small space between them and pressing his lips to hers. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But Bridget answered by reaching up and cupping his face with both hands, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Bridget rested her forehead against his. "I have been hoping you would do that," she whispered. "I have been wanting to do that since the first moment I saw you," Yates admitted. "You were mending that saddle, and your hands moved so surely, so confidently, and I thought if you could fix leather that was torn and worn, maybe you could fix me too. You are not broken, Yates. You are scarred. There is a difference." She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "Scars are just proof that you survived, that you are still here." "I want to be here," he said. "I want to be here with you, but I do not know if I am good enough for that, if I am whole enough. Let me be the judge of what is good enough for me." There was steel in her voice, that quiet strength he had sensed from the beginning. "I am not asking you to be perfect. I am just asking you to be honest, to let me in. Can you do that?" It was the hardest thing Yates had ever been asked to do, harder than any battle he had fought, harder than any trail he had ridden. Letting someone in meant showing her the darkness, the shame, the guilt that lived inside him like a cancer. It meant risking her seeing him for what he really was and turning away in disgust. But when he looked at Bridget, at the hope and determination and love already growing in her eyes, he found he could not do anything else. "Yes," he said, "I can try." And so he did. Over the following weeks, Yates opened up to Bridget in ways he had never opened up to anyone. He told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done, about the boy he had been, and the man those experiences had forged. He told her about the nightmares, about the survivor's guilt that ate at him whenever he thought about his brother dying while he lived, about the sense that he did not deserve happiness or peace or love, because he had taken those things from others. Bridget listened to all of it without judgment, without pulling away. Sometimes she cried, but not for herself. She cried for the boy Yates had been, for the innocence stolen from him, for the weight he had carried alone for so long. And when he was done talking, wrung out and vulnerable, she held him and told him what he needed to hear, that he was not defined by the worst things he had done in the worst moments of his life, that he deserved forgiveness, especially his own, that she loved him, not despite his scars but including them, because they were part of who he was. Yates could not quite believe it at first. He kept waiting for her to realize she had made a mistake, to see him clearly and understand she could do better. But Bridget was stubborn, and she refused to let him push her away. When the nightmares came and he woke shaking, she was there, having somehow convinced Mrs. Chen that propriety could occasionally be bent in the service of healing. She would hold him and talk him down, her voice steady and sure, until he could breathe again. In return, Yates learned about Bridget's darkness too. About the fear she carried of ending up alone, of the shop failing and leaving her destitute. About the anger she still felt toward her father for dying and leaving her to face the world by herself. About the loneliness that had defined most of her adult life, as the men in Lordsburg saw her either as too independent to bother with, or as a novelty to be conquered and discarded. "I had begun to think maybe I was meant to be alone," she admitted one night as they lay together in Yates's narrow bed, her head on his chest and his arm around her shoulders. "That maybe I was too much for most men, too opinionated and stubborn and sure of myself. But I could not change who I was just to make myself more palatable." "Good," Yates said fiercely. "Do not ever change. You are perfect exactly as you are." She tilted her head up to look at him. "So are you. I am far from perfect for me then. Yates kissed the top of her head and held her closer, marveling at the simple miracle of having someone who wanted to be held by him, who found comfort and safety in his arms despite knowing all the ways those arms had dealt death. It was a gift he had never expected and did not fully understand, but he was learning to accept it, to believe that maybe, possibly, he could have this. Summer turned to fall, and the brutal heat of the New Mexico desert eased into something more bearable. Yates continued working at the stockyards, and he was good at it, good enough that the foreman made him assistant manager with a raise in pay. He began to think about the future in ways he had not since before the war, about building something permanent instead of just drifting from one temporary situation to the next. He and Bridget were together constantly now, and the entire town knew it. Most people seemed happy for them. Mrs. Chen certainly was, beaming whenever she saw them together and making pointed comments about weddings and grandchildren. A few men grumbled that Yates had no business courting Bridget, that she was too good for a drifter cowboy with no family and a dark past, but those voices were few and easily ignored. The only real complication was Bridget's shop. Business had been steady but not spectacular, and there were months when she barely made enough to cover her expenses. Yates helped when he could, taking on odd jobs to bring in extra money, but Bridget was proud and did not like feeling dependent. They argued about it sometimes, not with real heat but with the tension of two independent people learning to navigate shared responsibility. "I do not need you to save me," Bridget said one evening after Yates suggested he could loan her money to buy new supplies. "I know you do not," Yates replied, "but why should you struggle alone when I can help? Because I have been taking care of myself for a long time and I am good at it." "I know that too. I am not trying to take anything away from you, Bridget. I just want to share the load." She looked at him for a long moment, frustration and affection warring on her face. Then she sighed. "I am not used to having someone who wants to share the load. It is hard for me to accept help." "I understand that." Yates crossed to her and took her hands in his. "But we are in this together now. Your struggles are my struggles. Your successes are my successes. That is what it means to build a life with someone." "Is that what we are doing? Building a life together? I hope so." His heart was hammering because this felt like the edge of something important. "If that is what you want too." "It is," Bridget said, and the smile that broke across her face was like the sun coming up over the desert. "It is what I want more than anything." "Then marry me," Yates said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a stockyard worker with a past that will never quite let me go. But I love you, Bridget. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. And I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth trying to make you happy. So marry me, please." Bridget was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was laughing too. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you too, Yates. I have loved you since you walked into my shop with that broken saddle strap, looking like you had lost everything. I wanted so badly to fix whatever was hurting you, to show you that life could still be good." "You did," Yates said, pulling her into his arms and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world because she was. "You fixed me. You made me whole again." "We fixed each other," Bridget corrected, pulling back to kiss him. "That is what love does. It mends the torn places." They were married 3 weeks later in the old mission church, with Mrs. Chen and the stockyard foreman as witnesses. Bridget wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Yates wore his best suit, the one he had brought west but never worn because there had been no occasion special enough. The priest who performed the ceremony was ancient and half-deaf, but his blessing was sincere, and when Yates slid the simple gold band onto Bridget's finger, He felt something settle into place inside himself, a rightness he had not known was possible. They held a small reception at the boarding house, and it seemed like half of Lordsburg showed up, bringing food and drink and well wishes. Even the men who had grumbled about their courtship came and congratulated Yates, telling him he was a lucky man. He agreed wholeheartedly. He was lucky beyond measure, beyond deserving, and he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure Bridget never regretted taking a chance on a broken cowboy with more scars than sense. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a adobe structure with 2 rooms and a shaded porch that Bridget had purchased with her savings. It was not much, but it was theirs, and they made it into a home. Yates built shelves for Bridget's books and a larger workbench for her leatherworking. Bridget sewed curtains and planted herbs in pots on the porch. They acquired 2 cats who showed up half-starved and decided to stay, and Yates's gelding lived in a small corral out back. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Yates worked at the stockyards during the day, and Bridget ran her leather shop. In the evenings, they came together to cook dinner and talk about their days, the small domestic intimacies that Yates had never imagined himself experiencing. Sometimes they would sit on the porch and watch the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. Sometimes they would lie in bed and make love with a tenderness that still surprised Yates, still made him feel like he was discovering something new and miraculous. The nightmares became less frequent, and when they came, Bridget was there to hold him through them. She never complained, never made him feel weak or broken. She just loved him, steadily and surely, and slowly, Yates began to believe that maybe he really could have this, that maybe he really did deserve happiness after all. About 6 months into their marriage, Bridget told him she was pregnant. Yates was terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. The idea of being a father, of bringing a child into the world and being responsible for its safety and happiness, felt overwhelming. But Bridget was calm and confident, and her certainty helped steady him. "We are going to be good parents," she told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the slight swell of her belly. "We have both known loss and pain, and that means we will appreciate what we have. We will teach our child to be strong and kind and honest. What if I fail?" Yates asked quietly, "What if I cannot protect them? What if I am not enough?" "You are enough," Bridget said firmly. "You are more than enough. And you will not be doing this alone. We are a team, remember. We will figure it out together." The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Bridget had to cut back on some of the heavier work in the leather shop. Yates took on extra hours at the stockyards to make up for the lost income, and several of Bridget's regular customers stepped up to help, spreading the word about the quality of her work and bringing her smaller projects that did not require as much physical labor. The baby came in early spring, a long and difficult labor that left Yates pacing the floor of their small house while Mrs. Chen and the midwife attended to Bridget. Every cry from the bedroom felt like a knife in his chest, and he found himself praying to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore, bargaining and pleading for Bridget and the baby to be safe. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the desert, he heard a new sound, the thin, reedy wail of a newborn. Mrs. Chen emerged from the bedroom, exhausted but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "Both mother and baby are healthy. You can go in now." Yates did not remember crossing the room. One moment he was standing in the main room, and the next he was kneeling beside the bed where Bridget lay, pale and sweat-soaked but radiantly happy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Meet your son," she said, her voice hoarse but full of love. Yates looked down at the baby, at the tiny red face and the miniature hands curled into fists, and felt something crack open inside his chest. This was his son, his child. A new life that he and Bridget had created together. A future that suddenly felt real and precious in a way nothing had since before the war. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, reaching out to touch one of those impossibly small hands. The baby's fingers wrapped around his calloused index finger, and Yates felt tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect, and you are perfect, and I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I am so grateful." "We deserve it," Bridget said, covering his hand with hers. "We both deserve happiness, Yates. We both deserve a future, and this is ours." They named the baby Matthew after Yates's older brother. It was Bridget's idea, and when she suggested it, Yates wept again because it felt like a way of honoring the past while still moving forward, of acknowledging what had been lost while celebrating what had been found. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, and Yates took to fatherhood with an intensity that surprised him. He was terrified of making mistakes, of somehow damaging this precious new life, but Bridget guided him with patience and humor. She showed him how to change diapers and prepare bottles, how to soothe the baby when he cried, and how to recognize the difference between hungry cries and tired cries, and the cries that meant something was genuinely wrong. Yates would hold Matthew for hours, rocking him and singing old songs he barely remembered from his own childhood. He would watch the baby sleep and marvel at the miracle of new life, at the idea that something so innocent and perfect could exist in a world that had shown him so much ugliness. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Bridget told him one evening as she watched them together. "I hope so," Yates said. "I want to give him everything I did not have: safety, stability, a father who is present and loving. You are already giving him those things." As Matthew grew from an infant into a toddler, Yates found himself changing in ways he had not anticipated. The anger and guilt that had defined him for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with atoning for the past and everything to do with building the future. He was not just living anymore, not just surviving day to day. He was thriving, creating a life worth living, surrounded by people he loved and who loved him in return. Bridget's leather shop began to do better as well. Word spread about her skill, and ranchers from miles around brought her their tack to repair or commissioned new saddles. She hired a young Mexican man named Diego to help with the heavier work, and the extra income allowed them to save money, to think about expanding the house or possibly buying a small piece of land outside of town. Lordsburg itself was growing, the mining boom bringing more people and more businesses. There was talk of building a proper school, of bringing in a doctor to replace the aging midwife who had delivered Matthew. The town was becoming more civilized, less wild, and while part of Yates missed the simplicity of the earlier days, he recognized that change was inevitable and not always bad. When Matthew was 2 years old, Bridget became pregnant again. This time, Yates was less terrified and more excited, able to envision the process and trust that it would turn out well. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and Bridget continued working almost until the day their daughter was born. They named her Rose, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Matthew was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, and Yates spent many hours teaching his son how to be gentle, how to help care for this new member of their family. The years passed in a blur of small moments and gradual changes. Matthew started school at the newly built schoolhouse, proving to be a bright child with his mother's quick mind and his father's quiet determination. Rose grew into a talkative, energetic toddler who followed her older brother everywhere and drove him to distraction with her constant questions. Yates was promoted to full manager of the stockyards, a position that came with enough money that Bridget could afford to be more selective about the projects she took on. They expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper workshop for Bridget, so she could move her business out of the shop in town and work from home when she wanted to be close to the children. Mrs. Chen retired from running the boarding house and moved in with her daughter in Santa Fe, but not before extracting a promise from Yates and Bridget that they would visit her regularly. They kept that promise, making the trip twice a year with the children, who adored the old woman who had witnessed the beginning of their parents' love story. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they no longer controlled Yates's life. He had learned to talk about them, to share the burden with Bridget, and that sharing had robbed them of much of their power. He joined a group of other veterans in Lordsburg, men who met once a month to talk about their experiences and support each other through the hard days. It helped to know he was not alone, that other men carried similar scars and were learning to live with them. When Matthew was 8 and Rose was 6, Yates's former commanding officer passed through Lordsburg and stopped to see him. The man was older now, gray-haired and bent, but his eyes still held the same sharpness Yates remembered from the war. "I wanted to see if the rumors were true," the officer said as they sat on Yates's porch, drinking coffee and watching the children play in the yard. "They said you had settled down, gotten married, built a life for yourself. I am glad to see it is true." "It is," Yates said. "I never thought it would be possible, but here I am. You were a good soldier, Xavier, one of the best, but I am glad you found a way to be something other than that. We were never meant to be soldiers forever. We were always meant to go home and build lives. Some of us did not get that chance," Yates said quietly, thinking of his brother, of all the men who had died before they could come home. "No, some of us did not. Which is why those of us who survived owe it to them to live well, to make something of the time we were given." The officer finished his coffee and stood. "You have done that, Xavier. You have built something good here, something worth having. Do not ever forget how precious that is." After the officer left, Yates sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about those words. He had built something good. Against all odds, despite all his damage and darkness, he had found love and created a family and made a home. It was not perfect. There were still hard days, still moments when the past reached out and tried to drag him under. But those moments were increasingly rare, and they were always followed by the reminder of what he had. Bridget's love, his children's laughter, the solid reality of the life they were building together. That evening, after the children were in bed, Yates and Bridget sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars come out over the desert. Bridget leaned against him, and Yates wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You remember the first time we met?" Bridget asked. "Every detail," Yates said. "You were mending a saddle. Your hands moved so surely. I thought you were the most capable person I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Bridget admitted. "When you walked in, you looked so lost, so haunted. I wanted to help you, but I did not know how. All I could offer was a repaired saddle strap." "It was enough," Yates said. "It was more than enough, because it brought me back the next day and the day after that, and eventually it brought me to this." He gestured to the house, to the life they had built. "You gave me a reason to stay. You gave me a reason to heal." "We healed each other," Bridget said. "That is what I think love does at its best. It finds the broken places and mends them, not by erasing the cracks, but by making them part of something stronger." "Like leather," Yates said, smiling. "The way you repair saddles. The stitching makes them stronger than they were originally." "Exactly like that." Bridget turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "I love you, Yates Xavier. I loved you when you were broken, and I love you now that you are whole. I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "And I love you," Yates said, kissing her forehead. You saved me, Bridget. You looked at a damaged cowboy with a broken saddle strap and saw someone worth saving. You gave me back my life. You gave me mine too, Bridget said. I was so lonely before you came. I had my work and my pride, but I did not have hope. You gave me that. You gave me a future worth looking forward to. They sat together in comfortable silence as the desert night deepened around them. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, its own moments of difficulty and grace. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that day, when a broken saddle strap brought a lost cowboy into a leather shop and set in motion a love story neither of them had been looking for, but both of them desperately needed. Years continued to pass in their small corner of New Mexico territory. Matthew grew into a tall, serious young man with his father's sense of responsibility and his mother's creativity. He showed an aptitude for working with wood and metal, and Yates built him a workshop where he could practice his craft. Rose inherited her mother's gift with leather and her father's quiet strength, and by the time she was 12, she was helping Bridget in the shop and showing signs of becoming an even finer craftswoman than her mother. When Matthew was 16, he asked Yates about the war. They were mending a fence line together, working in the comfortable silence that had always existed between them, when Matthew suddenly set down his tools and looked at his father. "What was it like?" he asked. "The war. I have heard stories from other men, but I want to hear it from you." Yates considered his answer carefully. He had always known this question would come, and he had thought long and hard about how to respond. He did not want to glorify war, but he also did not want to lie to his son. "It was the worst thing I have ever experienced," he said finally. "It took everything from me, my childhood, my innocence, my brother. It left me with scars that I will carry for the rest of my life, but it also taught me things I could not have learned any other way. It taught me about courage and sacrifice and the bonds that form between men who face death together. It taught me to appreciate life because I saw how easily it could be taken away." "Do you regret fighting?" Matthew asked. "I regret the necessity of it," Yates said. "I regret that men thought war was the answer to their disagreements, but I do not regret fighting for what I believed in or for standing beside my brother and my fellow soldiers. I only wish the price had not been so high." Matthew nodded slowly, processing this. "I hope I never have to make the choices you made." "So do I, son. So do I." That conversation stayed with Yates for a long time. It made him think about the legacy he was leaving for his children, about the lessons his life had taught him and what he wanted to pass on. He and Bridget talked about it late into the night, discussing their hopes and fears for Matthew and Rose, for the world they would inherit. "We have given them love and stability," Bridget said. "We have shown them what it looks like to build a life with someone, to work through difficulties, to choose each other every day. That is the best foundation we can provide." "I want them to be happy," Yates said. "I want them to have easier lives than we did." "They will have different lives," Bridget corrected. "Not necessarily easier, but different. We cannot protect them from everything, Yates. All we can do is love them and teach them and trust that they will find their way." When Matthew was 19, he fell in love with a girl named Sarah, the daughter of the town doctor. Yates liked her immediately. She was smart and kind, with a practical nature that complemented Matthew's more idealistic tendencies. When Matthew asked for Yates's blessing to marry her, Yates gave it gladly. The wedding was held in the same mission church where Yates and Bridget had married 20 years earlier. Watching his son stand at the altar, nervous and hopeful and so very young, Yates felt the weight of time passing. But it was not a sad wait. It was the natural progression of life, the way one generation made way for the next. At the reception, as Yates danced with Bridget, he marveled at how much had changed since that day he had walked into her leather shop with a broken saddle strap. He had been so lost then, so convinced that he would never find peace or happiness. But here he was, surrounded by family and friends, his son newly married and his daughter growing into a remarkable young woman, his wife still beautiful and still the center of his world. "What are you thinking about?" Bridget asked, seeing the expression on his face. "About how lucky I am," Yates said. "About how a random broken strap changed everything." "It was not random," Bridget said. "I think we were meant to find each other. I think the universe knew we needed each other and made sure our paths crossed." "You believe in fate." "I believe in love," Bridget said. "And I believe that love has a way of finding us when we need it most." Matthew and Sarah moved into a house just down the street, close enough that they could visit frequently but far enough to have their own space. Within a year, they had a baby of their own, a little girl they named after Bridget. Yates became a grandfather and discovered that the role suited him perfectly. He loved spoiling his granddaughter in ways he had been too practical to spoil his own children, loved watching her grow and learn and discover the world. Rose, meanwhile, had taken over most of the day-to-day operations of the leather shop. At 18, she was already known throughout the territory as one of the finest saddle makers in New Mexico. She had her mother's skill, but had added innovations of her own, new techniques and designs that made her work even more sought after. Bridget stepped back gradually, content to let her daughter take the lead while she enjoyed the slower pace of grandmotherhood. Yates continued working at the stockyards, though in a reduced capacity. He was in his 50s now, and the years of hard labor had taken their toll on his body. His hands ached in the cold and his back protested when he lifted heavy loads, but he was content. He had work that gave him purpose, a family that gave him joy, and a wife who still made his heart skip when she smiled at him. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Bridget suddenly said, "We did it, you know." "Did what?" "Built a life. A real, solid, beautiful life." She squeezed his hand. "When I was younger, sitting alone in my father's shop, I used to dream about what it would be like to have someone to share things with. Someone who would understand me and challenge me and love me despite my flaws. I thought it was just a dream. But then you walked in with that broken saddle strap and everything changed." "You changed it," Yates said. "You saw something in me worth saving. I saw a man who was hurting and who needed someone to remind him he was still alive." Bridget leaned her head on his shoulder. "But you did the real work, Yates. You chose to heal. You chose to let me in. You chose to build this life with me. I could not have done any of that for you. You had to do it yourself. I could not have done it without you, though. You were the reason I wanted to heal. You were the reason I started believing I could have a future." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Yates thought about the long road that had brought him to this moment, about the war and the wandering and the years of feeling like he was only half alive. He thought about that day in the leather shop, about seeing Bridget for the first time and feeling something stir in the deadened space of his heart. He had been right that day. She had been able to repair the tear in his soul. Not through any magic or special power, but simply through loving him steadily and refusing to let him give up on himself. Through showing him day after day that he was worthy of love, that his past did not define his future, that he could be more than the sum of his scars. In return, he had given her the same gift. He had seen her not as the lonely woman running her father's shop, but as the strong, capable, beautiful person she truly was. He had loved her for her independence and her skill and her refusal to be anything less than herself. Together, they had built something neither of them could have built alone. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Bridget said quietly, "I am glad it was you who walked into my shop that day. I am glad it was your saddle strap that broke. I am glad we found each other." "So am I," Yates said, pulling her closer. "So am I." The years that followed were gentle ones. Yates retired fully from the stockyards and spent his days helping Rose in the leather shop, teaching his granddaughter to ride, and simply enjoying the slower pace of life. His nightmares had become rare, appearing only once or twice a year, and when they came, Bridget was still there to hold him through them. Matthew and Sarah had 2 more children, and Rose eventually married a young rancher named Tom who treated her with the respect and love she deserved. The house that had once been just for Yates and Bridget became the center of a larger family, filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing and multiple generations gathering for Sunday dinners. When Yates was 62, he received a letter from the War Department. It was an official commendation, recognizing his service and awarding him a small pension. The letter mentioned his bravery at several battles, his leadership, his dedication. Yates read it once and then put it away in a drawer. Those battles belonged to a different person, a boy who had become a man in the worst possible way. He honored that boy's sacrifice, but he no longer defined himself by it. "Does it feel good to be recognized?" Bridget asked that evening. "It feels unnecessary," Yates said honestly. "That part of my life is long over. This is what matters now." He gestured to the house, to the family portraits on the walls, to the life they had built together. "You are a good man, Yates Xavier," Bridget said. "You always were, even when you could not see it yourself." One autumn evening, when Yates was 68 and Bridget was 65, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The air was cool and clear, and the desert stretched out before them, beautiful in its harshness. Their granddaughter was visiting, practicing her letters at the small table they kept on the porch, and the sound of her pencil scratching against paper was soothing in its domesticity. "You ever think about what would have happened if your saddle strap had not broken that day?" Bridget asked suddenly. Yates considered the question. "I would have kept drifting," he said. "I would have moved on from Lordsburg and ended up in some other dusty town, doing some other meaningless work. Eventually, I probably would have put a bullet in my head or drunk myself to death or gotten into a fight I could not win. I was not built to survive alone. I did not want to survive. And now I want every day I can get," Yates said simply. "Every morning I wake up with you beside me is a gift I never expected. Every dinner with our family, every smile from our grandchildren, every sunset we watch together, it is all more than I ever thought I deserved." "You deserve all of it and more," Bridget said firmly. "You deserve happiness, Yates. You always have." As the evening deepened and their granddaughter finished her letters and went inside to help prepare dinner, Yates and Bridget remained on the porch, hands clasped, watching the world turn from day to night. They had watched this transformation thousands of times over the decades of their marriage, but it never got old. There was something eternal about it, something that reminded them they were part of something larger than themselves. "I love you," Yates said, as he said every day, because some things needed to be spoken aloud even when they were understood. "I love you too," Bridget replied, as she always did, with the same warmth and certainty she had brought to every day of their marriage. Inside the house, their family moved about, preparing the evening meal, laughing and talking, living the lives that Yates and Bridget had made possible by choosing each other all those years ago. The smell of cooking drifted out to the porch, And soon they would go inside and join the chaos and joy of multiple generations, gathered around one table. But for now, they sat together in the twilight, two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had repaired each other's broken places and built something beautiful from the fragments. A cowboy who had thought himself beyond repair. A woman who had known that nothing was beyond fixing if you had the right tools and the will to use them. She had mended his saddle, and in doing so, she had mended his soul. Together, they had created a life worth living, a legacy of love that would extend long past their own time on earth. And as they sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the evidence of that love, neither of them would have changed a single moment of the journey that had brought them to this place. The story of Yates and Bridget Xavier became something of a legend in Lordsburg. People spoke of them as an example of what love could be at its best, steady and sure, and built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Young couples sought their advice, and they gave it freely, always emphasizing the importance of choosing each other daily, of working through difficulties together, of never taking for granted the gift of a partner who truly saw you. When Yates was 73, he suffered a mild stroke that left him weakened but not incapacitated. The doctor warned that he needed to slow down even further to avoid stress and heavy labor. Yates grumbled about it, but Bridget was firm. She had not kept him alive this long just to lose him to stubbornness. "You are going to rest," she told him in a tone that brooked no argument. "You are going to let our children help with the heavy work. You are going to accept that you are not 26 anymore." "I know I am not 26, Yates protested, "but I am not dead either. I can still be useful." "You are useful. You are useful by being here, by being alive, by being the center of this family." Bridget sat down beside his bed and took his hand. "I need you, Yates. Our children need you. Our grandchildren need you. So you are going to take care of yourself, even if I have to tie you to this bed to make you do it." Yates looked at her, at the determination in her eyes and the love that fueled it, and he surrendered. "All right," he said, "I will rest, but you have to rest too. You are not exactly young yourself." "Fair enough," Bridget agreed. "We will rest together." And they did. They spent more time on their porch, watching the world go by, receiving visits from family and friends. They read books together, took short walks when Yates felt strong enough, and simply enjoyed each other's company in the way that only people who had been together for decades truly could. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a large celebration. It seemed like everyone in Lordsburg came, along with people from neighboring towns who had known them over the years. There were speeches and toasts, and a cake that Rose had special ordered from Santa Fe. Matthew presented them with a beautiful wooden plaque he had carved, listing their wedding date and their children's and grandchildren's names. Rose gave them a leather-bound journal, each page filled with memories and stories from different family members and friends. Yates stood up, leaning heavily on his cane, and raised his glass. 50 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I walked into a leather shop with a broken saddle strap. I was a broken man who did not believe he could ever be whole again. But the woman in that shop saw something I could not see. She saw possibility. She saw hope. She saw a future worth building." He turned to Bridget, who was sitting beside him, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Bridget. You gave me a reason to live, a home, a family, a love I did not know was possible. Every day with you has been a gift. Every moment has been precious. I would not trade a single second of our life together, not even the hard parts, because all of it led us here, to this moment, surrounded by the family we created and the love we have nurtured for 50 years. The room erupted in applause, and Bridget stood and kissed him, long and sweet, the way she had kissed him on their wedding day and every day since. When they finally pulled apart, she turned to address the crowd. "Yates says I gave him everything," she said, "but the truth is we gave each other everything. We found each other when we both needed finding. We saved each other when we both needed saving. That is what love is. Not one person fixing another, but two people choosing to build something together, day after day, year after year, through good times and bad. I am grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. I am grateful that his saddle strap broke all those years ago. And I am grateful that we have had 50 years to show each other what love truly means." The celebration continued long into the night, but eventually, Yates and Bridget retired to their bedroom, exhausted but happy. They lay in bed together, and Yates pulled Bridget close, her head resting on his chest as it had done for so many thousands of nights. 50 years, he murmured. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Bridget said. Sometimes I still feel like that young woman in the leather shop, wondering if I would ever find someone to share my life with. Other times I feel every one of my 65 years. You are still beautiful, Yates said. More beautiful now than ever, because I can see our entire life together when I look at you. Every laugh line, every gray hair, it is all a map of our journey. You are a romantic old cowboy, Bridget said fondly. Only with you, Yates replied. You are the only one who ever made me want to be romantic. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would last beyond their lifetimes, a legacy of love that would continue through their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. The years after their anniversary were gentle. Yates's health remained stable, and Bridget's eyesight began to fail slightly, but they adapted. They spent more time listening to their grandchildren read aloud, to music played on the piano that Matthew had brought into the house, to the sounds of their family living and loving and growing around them. When Yates was 78, he began to have trouble with his heart. The doctor was frank. He had maybe a year, maybe 2 if he was lucky and took care of himself. Yates received the news with surprising calm. He had long since made peace with death. He had lived far longer than he had any right to expect, and he had lived well. He told Bridget that evening as they sat on their porch. She took it hard, as he had known she would, but she did not break down. She was too strong for that, had been through too much to crumble now. We knew this day would come eventually, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. We have been lucky to have this long. I do not want to leave you, Yates said. That is the only thing I regret. I hate the idea of you being alone. I will not be alone, Bridget said. I have our children and grandchildren. I have our friends. I have a lifetime of memories to keep me company. And I have the knowledge that you loved me every single day of our marriage. That is more than most people ever get. Promise me something, Yates said. Anything. Promise me you will keep living after I am gone. Really living, not just existing. Keep working with leather if it makes you happy. Spend time with the family. Watch our grandchildren grow up. Do not let my death dim your light. I promise, Bridget said, though they both knew how hard it would be to keep that promise. The final year of Yates's life was bittersweet. He grew weaker gradually, his body slowly shutting down, but his mind remained sharp. He spent his days on the porch, receiving visitors, telling stories to his grandchildren, and simply being present with the people he loved. Bridget rarely left his side, and their children took turns staying with them, making sure they had everything they needed. One evening in late spring, when the desert was blooming with unexpected color after a rare, wet winter, Yates asked Bridget to bring him the leather journal Rose had given them on their anniversary. He had been adding to it over the years, writing down his thoughts and memories, wanting to leave something for his children and grandchildren that would help them understand who he had been and what he had valued. He made his final entry that evening, writing slowly and carefully. To my beloved family, I am writing this as my life draws to a close, and I want you to know that I have no regrets. I lived hard and made mistakes, especially in my youth. I saw and did things during the war that haunted me for years. But I also found love beyond measure, built a family I am proud of, and learned that it is possible to heal from even the deepest wounds. Your grandmother saved me in every way a person can be saved. When I met her, I was empty, hollow, existing but not truly alive. She saw past that emptiness to the man I could still become. She loved me patiently and fiercely, and she taught me that I deserved happiness and peace. What I want you to take from my life is this: you are never too broken to be fixed. You are never so lost that you cannot be found. And love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe. It can heal wounds that seem unhealable. It can build bridges across chasms of pain. It can transform lives. Choose love. Choose it over anger, over fear, over pride. Choose to see the best in people. Choose to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Choose to build something lasting, even when the world seems intent on tearing things down. I love you all more than words can express. Thank you for the gift of being your father and grandfather. Thank you for the joy you have brought to my life. Take care of your grandmother. She is the strongest person I have ever known, but she will need you in the days ahead. Live well. Love deeply. And remember that a cowboy who thought he was beyond repair found healing in a leather shop in Lordsburg, New Mexico, and built a life worth living. If I could do it, so can you. He signed it and closed the journal, then called his family together. They gathered in the bedroom, all of them knowing without being told that this was important. Yates looked around at their faces, at the love and concern and sadness there, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I want to thank you all," he said, his voice weak but clear. "For the life we have built together, for the love you have shown me, for accepting me despite my flaws. I could not have asked for a better family." Matthew stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "You have been the best father anyone could ask for. You taught me how to be a man, how to be a husband, how to be a father. Everything good in my life comes from your example." Rose added, "You never made me feel like I was less than because I was a girl. You supported my dreams and treated me as an equal. That gave me the confidence to become who I am." One by one, the grandchildren spoke, sharing memories and expressing their love. Through it all, Bridget sat beside Yates, holding his hand, her face wet with tears but her expression peaceful. When everyone had spoken, Yates said, "I am tired now. I think I need to rest. But I want you all to know I will carry your love with me wherever I go next. It has been the greatest honor of my life to be part of this family." They stayed with him through the night, taking turns sitting by his bedside, telling stories and singing songs and simply being present. As dawn began to break over the desert, Yates stirred and opened his eyes. He looked at Bridget, who had not left his side all night. "I see you," he whispered. "I see you there in the leather shop, mending that saddle, your hands moving so surely. I knew the first moment I saw you that you could fix me. And you did." "We fixed each other," Bridget said, leaning close so he could hear her. "I love you, Yates Xavier. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Yates said. "Thank you for 51 years of happiness. Thank you for showing me what life could be." He closed his eyes then, a small smile on his face, and slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the family he and Bridget had created, wrapped in the love that had defined and saved him. Bridget sat with him for a long time after he was gone, holding his hand, memorizing his face one final time. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and turned to her family. "He would want us to celebrate his life, not just mourn his death," she said. "He lived well. He loved deeply, and he left us with a legacy we can be proud of. Let us honor that," and they did. The funeral was attended by seemingly everyone in Lordsburg, and many people from surrounding communities. Person after person stood up to share stories about Yates, about his kindness and his integrity, and the quiet way he had of making people feel seen and valued. The preacher spoke of redemption and second chances and the power of love to transform lives. Yates was buried in the Lordsburg Cemetery, on a hill overlooking the town he had called home for more than 50 years. Bridget had a simple marker placed on his grave: Yates Xavier, 1852–1930. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he came to Lordsburg broken and left whole. His love endures. In the months after Yates's death, Bridget struggled. Despite her promise, despite her determination to keep living, the grief was overwhelming at times. The house felt too empty without him. The porch where they had sat together for so many years felt haunted by his absence. There were moments when she was not sure she could go on, but she had made a promise, and Bridget Lorenzo Xavier kept her promises. She forced herself to get up each morning. She went to the leather shop and lost herself in work. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, letting their love sustain her. And slowly, gradually, the sharp edge of grief began to dull. She lived for another 8 years after Yates died, years that were quieter and lonelier, but still full of purpose. She continued to work with leather until her hands could no longer manage the needles. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry and start families of their own. She saw Matthew elected to the town council, and Rose expand the leather business into neighboring territories. She held great-grandchildren in her arms and told them stories about the man who had been her husband, her partner, her greatest love. When Bridget died at 83, peacefully in her sleep, the entire town mourned. She was laid to rest beside Yates, and her family added to her marker: Bridget Lorenzo Xavier, 1855–1938. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she saw what others missed and mended what others thought broken. Her love endures. The house they had built together was passed down to Matthew, and then to his children. The leather shop continued for 2 more generations before finally closing, but pieces made by Bridget and Rose remained family heirlooms, treasured and preserved. The story of how Yates and Bridget met, of the broken saddle strap that brought them together, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And in Lordsburg, New Mexico, in a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the town, 2 markers stood side by side. Monuments to a love that had overcome darkness, that had healed deep wounds, that had created a legacy lasting far beyond 2 individual lives. A cowboy and a leather worker who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had built something beautiful from brokenness, who had proved that it is never too late for redemption, never too late for love, never too late to discover that the right person can repair even the deepest tear in your soul.